Hello, my name is Samantha Seely. I'm the Student Outreach Coordinator for the Elizabethtown College Study Abroad Office, and I studied abroad in Austria and Germany. Today, I'll be talking with E-Town alum and personal friend Grace Gibson about her time studying abroad in Florence, Italy. Hello, Grace. Welcome to the
Hi,
show.
thanks for having me.
So to start off, I'd like you to introduce yourself and give me your name, what year you graduated, what you majored in, and where you studied abroad.
Cool. Okay, my name is Grace Gibson. I graduated from E-Town in 2020 with an English literature degree, biology minor, and I studied abroad in spring of 2019 in Florence, Italy.
Awesome. So, did you always want to study abroad?
As soon as I knew what it was, yes, I think so. I know when I was choosing a college, I wanted to go a place that had a study abroad program, and I actually ruled out another school because I was initially in the pre-med track, and that school didn't allow pre-med students to study abroad, and I knew that was something I was interested in. Before I studied abroad, I had never left the country, and I know that was something I wanted to do, whether it be through study abroad or through personal travel. And I haven't left the country since, obviously. So, um, yeah, I think I don't remember knowing what study abroad was for many years before coming to college, but I think as soon as I knew that was a possibility, and that college students could just go to another country and do their studies there, that was something that interested me.
Why do you think it interested you?
Partially because I had never left the country, and my family is not a huge travel family. We had gone on road trips and things, but I had not traveled very much, and I I think I have always been interested in learning more about the world and understanding the world outside of just my little space. And I felt that studying abroad or going abroad in any context really would help me to better understand more of the world. And um hmm, probably also just the romantic notions of it, like the idea of, oh, going to Florence, Italy, are we? Just that kind of storied experience of the young foreigner who goes abroad and has intrepid adventures. And so I think part of it was me imagining myself as that archetype. And what draws me to traveling now, besides the fact that I can't do it, is still kind of the same thing. I just want to understand more of the world. And I know traveling isn't the only way to do that, but there's something to be said about how moving geographically, even if even if there are similarities between where you've come from and where you're going. So even if you're going to an English speaking country or a country where a lot of cultures and customs are shared, there's something about just the atmosphere and the environment there that is some level of difference. And I've even experienced this within the US, even in different parts of the US in different cities. And I think you gain a lot in putting yourself into those kinds of experiences and learning that your own corner of the world is not the entirety of the world, and your own experience of the world is not universal.
Hmm. And kind of jumping off of that, um, what were like some of the big ways that Italy was that different experience for you?
Well, obviously the language, because a lot of Italian people can speak kind of basic English, but a lot of them don't like to. And most things are completely in Italian. I went to an English speaking school, and so we had classes in English and everything, but outside of that context, everything was written in Italian, everyone spoke Italian, and so that was an adjustment. The pace of the life there is much slower and less frenetic than in America. And I think the biggest example of this is at restaurants. It's obviously not right now, but it was customary for people to go and have a very long meal in the middle of the day. Not customary exactly, but normal. And people will savor their food and linger there longer than they typically will in an American setting. And there's more attention paid to leisure time and to relaxation, at least from my perspective. And some of the Italian people I spoke to even said, "Oh, you Americans are always going so fast. You're always doing so many things." And yeah, that definitely showed. And I think some of, well, just the structure of the city and the environment was completely different because Florence has a pretty long history, and most of the buildings there, at least in the historical center, were older than the founding of the United States officially. So most structures that I entered were hundreds of years older than any other structure I had been inside before. And they weren't even ancient. It wasn't like these were ancient ruins. They were a few centuries old, but the gravity of that oldness really hits you when you either see a plaque that says, "Oh, this was founded in 1643," or you overhear a tour guide say, "Oh yes, this was a historical building that belonged to this family in the 14th century," and that's a pretty cool experience. And then related to that, when you see pictures of landmarks like things like the Duomo, the big dome in the church in Florence, or their other big churches, or the big museums, you expect them to be kind of singular. You don't expect them to exist in a context, but they very much do. And you can be walking along a street full of residential buildings or businesses, and then there's this ancient beautiful structure in front of you, and everything exists alongside each other and very close together. And I used to pass these enormous beautiful churches and other landmarks on my way to class. And that's just not an experience I've had anywhere in the US. And I know we do have probably some comparable things, but nothing that's directly comparable. And so that was pretty cool.
And how did that, that having that experience in Florence and, kind of seeing these differences and, like the slower pace of life you mentioned, and, that just the age of things and sort of the different, all these like little elements of culture, or specifically a different culture from the one you were raised in. How did that impact you when you came back to the US?
So a lot of the time when I think about it, I don't really remember a big change. I didn't experience much culture shock, and I also didn't experience much reverse culture shock. So the experience of coming back, I think I compartmentalized it in a way where it was like, okay, on this day, I'm in the US. This is the part of my life when I'm in Italy. And then this is the part of my life that I'm back in the US. And so those few months that I was not here, they had their place in my life, and then it was over. And I'm sure it affected me in different ways, but it was hard to see any of those. It's still kind of hard to see any of those beyond I have beyond the fact that I can say I've been out of the country and I have different memories and experiences I can share with people. And so there are things I definitely miss about living in Florence, and I miss a lot of the freedom I had there and the independence. And part of that is just living thousands of miles away from any person you know and not having the kind of obligations and responsibilities you have in normal life. When I think about Florence, it was not normal life. It was my fantasy life that existed for 3.5 months and then stopped when I had to return to my real life. And yeah, I think it definitely confirmed that I want to live in a city when I move out of my parents' house and get my own place. And it made me interested in studying the Italian language, which was not an interest I had before. I've seen Michelangelo's David in person now, and those are all cool things. But I'm I'm not sure it changed me in a deep, huge, meaningful way. I think it changed me in small, incidental ways more.
So, one thing that I know you did after coming back from Italy was for your honors in the discipline thesis, correct?
I've been exposed.
Um, you wrote a book, wrote and illustrated a book called A Life with a View,
Yeah, I
Reflections
have
on
it right here.
Stories, Art, and Identity. I
You
have my,
also have
yes, I
it.
have my copy with me. And I really wanted to bring this up because one, your writing is just incredible. I love your
Thank you.
writing. I love your
Thank you so much.
illustrations, and you wrote really poignantly and beautifully about the experience of studying abroad and
Thank you.
um, your experiences coming to Florence and kind of questioning things like privilege and identity and all of these other things. And I guess I just kind of wanted to start off with a really general question, which was
Mhm.
like, what led you to deciding to write and have that be the focus of what you were writing?
Um, this was another rush decision that I had to make very quickly and did not spend enough time thinking about because I had to propose my honors in the discipline project while I was in Florence. And obviously, I don't want to be thinking about my thesis when I'm in Florence. I don't know if this was everyone's experience, but I was not particularly interested in serious academics when I was in Florence. I was interested in having a cultural and artistic experience and learning about this beautiful city and eating a lot of gelato. And I was not looking forward to having to write a proposal. And so I had two basic ideas. One, the one that I scrapped was about War and Peace, um, which would have been a fun project, I guess. The other idea I had was to write about studying abroad, which was a weird thing to conceptualize while I was still in the middle of the process because I believe I had to write that proposal in late March. But I just went with it and it got approved and it seemed like people were excited about it. And so I just had to fulfill my proposal in a way.
In your book, you, I mean, it's in the title, Stories, Art, and Identity.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess, and it is about your time in Florence. And I was wondering, how did the experience of being in Florence influence your perceptions of these things? And
Mhm.
how would you say your perceptions of stories and art and identity, like how have those kind of changed through the experience of studying abroad?
I I think I talk about this in the book, but it really was just another life experience that I could filter my ideas through. And I believe I would have had developing ideas of stories and art and identity, regardless of where I had been for those 3.5 months. And they might have developed in different directions. And I think Florence Florence gave me space to do more of my own art because I wasn't doing intensive English classes at that point, and so I had more time to work on my own art. And I think it gave me more novel experiences and more unfamiliar ground to explore, but it was again just me and the same me who existed back in the US. And so I think if I had been at E-Town or in the US otherwise for that time, I would have just had different experiences and different filters for those ideas. And maybe the pace of the development of my changing ideas on those things increased while I was in Florence because I was having more new experiences and being forced into more unfamiliar areas. But also I'm not exactly sure because I have a habit of thinking deeply about things regardless of where I am. And I think I think the greatest way the time in Florence changed my ideas of different things was just by giving me the space and time to think about them because I wasn't working several jobs there and I wasn't taking multiple difficult classes there. And I did just have a lot of time to walk around and ponder, which was also my experience last spring when we were put into a pandemic lockdown. And so, regardless of where I was, I think Florence gave me definitely a beautiful environment and a beautiful setting that where I could do my thinking and pondering and walking around. Yeah, and then I think I spent a lot of time just considering the strangeness of that experience and how odd it was that I actually got to do that. And that led to some questions specifically about story and identity and why I was even allowed to do this in the first place and what factors had to coalesce to allow me to do this and how I could be in that position. And so those things again were on my mind before and after Florence, but by virtue of that being a very distinct and mm, audacious, maybe a very audacious experience for me to have, I think that probably accelerated and shifted some of my thoughts.
Hmm. What advice or tips do you have for people who are considering studying abroad, whether that's in Italy or anywhere else in the world?
Hmm. I struggle a lot with this question because I got a lot of different advice and stories and different um, just snippets from other people about what studying abroad was and their experience of it before I did it. And I don't think, aside from the really practical advice, like, oh, this is the type of converter you need to plug in your stuff, or this is, you shouldn't forget to pack this unusual thing. I think most things couldn't possibly prepare me for it. And I just had to go and live the experience. So I think on the practical side of things, talk to people who have been to the location you're going or a location you're interested in about things you wouldn't expect about it. I remember feeling surprised. I feel stupid for thinking this, but I expected more people to speak English. And maybe that's not an assumption most people would have, but I had never been in a place where people didn't speak English. And so that was just a surprise for me. And then just things like, which brands do they have in that location? What what are the brands that are analogous to certain brands you like to use? I had a real problem that I could not find a shampoo that worked for me in Italy, and so my hair suffered and I lost a lot of hair while I was there. So just the really small practical things and try to figure out things. Another thing, I couldn't find index cards anywhere. And that really messed me up because my entire model of studying is based on copious amounts of index cards. And so I think just talk to people and ask them very specific questions about what they didn't expect or what's something you wouldn't think about uh, related to living in that place. And then otherwise, I think try not to set expectations for what it's going to be and just let it be an experience. And don't try to make your study abroad experience into a mold of what you think studying abroad should look like, because there is very much this perfect, idealized picture and story of studying abroad that we get sold and that gets promoted a lot. And it's not going to look like that because that is a story someone made and not real life. And so I think let it have parts that aren't great and let yourself feel sad at some points and let yourself feel disappointment, and don't try to make it into everything of your dreams, because obviously it's not going to. But if you don't have that expectation, it's going to be pretty good still.
Awesome. I think that's excellent advice.
Thank you.
And for the last question, I always try to ask people this question. How would you describe study abroad in 5 words?
Can I copy Nicholas's idea and
Go
say
for
it?
it.
Okay. Un tempo strano, pero buono.
Mind translating that?
A weird time, but good.
Good description. Good description right there.
Thanks.
Um,
I'm sorry if my pronunciation was bad. I'm working on it.
Subscribe to the eTown Abroad podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and follow us on Instagram at eTown Abroad. For more information on our study abroad programs, visit etown.edu. The music for our show was composed by Elizabeth Baker and Avery Faust, and this episode was produced by Samantha Seely. Thanks for listening.